Born to be one. Coming together to redefine container shipping. We are one, believing in the power of working together. We take on new challenges every day with the uniqueness you see in our color. Overcoming obstacles beyond borders and cultures. On the sea, the land, and in the hearts of people. We refine the way the world moves. One has power. The strengths of many united. As a team with customers and partners, we can give life to a new way to move the world. As one, we can. One, Ocean Network Express.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining here in Singapore and for dialing in all over the world. Welcome to this media briefing, which is a business update from Ocean Network Express and hosted today by Jeremy Nixon, who is the Ocean Network Express Chief Executive Officer. As the three shareholders of Ocean Network Express are listed companies and we're about to enter the results season, Jeremy won't be able to provide detailed financial information or discuss topics of a financially sensitive nature. This session will last around 60 minutes and will be conducted in the English language. I'd now like to hand over to Jeremy to begin his presentation. Jeremy.
Thank you, Ed. Good afternoon and welcome to all of you for this media business briefing. Over the next 30 minutes, I'd like to sort of cover really two areas with you. One is looking at where we are today as ONE as a company and looking back over the last 5 years in terms of strategy and P&L performance, and then giving some thought to the second phase of our strategy, moving forward over the next 5 years in terms of where will we put some additional emphasis in some areas of what we've been doing. So maybe let's just go first of all to a timeline, something that may be quite familiar to some of you and not to others. But as you may be aware, our three shareholders, who are all Nikkei listed companies, announced the consolidation and movement of their three liner divisions into a new entity called Ocean Network Express, or ONE as we refer to it sometimes, in 2016. 2017, we started planning in terms of the project planning and incorporation of the company. And actually, by somewhat of coincidence, today actually is the 6th year anniversary of us incorporating ONE Singapore, which is our main company here in Singapore and where we have all our operating companies and our global head offices. And then in 2018, April, we went live. And that's really the first day. We call that day one, when we went live as a new entity. The three legacy companies no longer were trading and we moved forward. And so what you could say is really April 2023, which is quite recently, was really our 5th year anniversary, which we acknowledged in terms of things. So that was what we call phase one of our development, setting up, establishing, and moving the company forward. So in terms of that, where are we today? We're active in about 120 countries in the world. We have about 170 weekly liner services operating. We operate to about 250 ports in the world. We have around about 28,000 customers. We've grown the account base up to that level. And we have about 11,000 staff in total in terms of onshore manpower and staffing presence. And as you can see from the diagram, pretty active east-west trades, north-south trades, interregional trades, a few missing trades in terms of the full global spectrum, but we'll come on to that a little bit later. we go back to the original philosophy of the three shareholders, and particularly the management team of ONE, we really built it around two key principles. The first one was economy of scale. Of course, we were going from 3 legacy companies to a new company, which was 3 times larger. So that allowed us to move the hardware and the assets up to a higher level of scale, and therefore that could give us good slot economics. And that has been a key focus over the last 5 years. So I can think back to the original legacy days. We may have 3 different services operating with 3 sets of small ships, and now we can run that service with 1 single entity with a much larger ship size. So that's the hardware side of the economies of scale argument. The second is the operational efficiency, which is back to the people, the capability, the software side of our business, our processes, our systems, our people capability, and our innovation and best practice where we could leverage as well. So by putting the software and the new hardware dynamics together, we hope to be able to create this more competitive and more profitable company than the 3 previous legacy companies. So how did we do? So this is the trading net profit results over the first 5 years. And in the first year, 2018, it was a challenging year for the industry, but it was also a challenging year for ONE because this was our setup year. We incurred a lot of additional costs in and around setting up the company. But secondly, we also in the first 3 months had a few teething issues, and we didn't quite carry the same level of cargo as our legacy companies over those first 3-4 months. But by the end of 2018, we'd fully stabilized the company. We were up and running. And into 2019, still a challenging year for the industry, but we managed to turn it around and get into profitable territory. By 2020, however, we really had those synergies coming through from the consolidation of the 3 entities, and a lot of the software and hardware innovation and best practice we'd put into place in the previous 2 years started to really hit the ground running and started to come through in our results. 2020 was also a very challenging year because of COVID. Initially, we had this big supply shock where we saw a significant reduction in cargo volumes and then a strong recovery in the second half. The next 2 years, or the last 2 years, as we're all aware, very much a story around strong trading markets to do with the COVID developments and the very strong cargo volumes. Okay, so we had a very beneficial trading environment, but also I think a lot of the synergies and cost savings further were coming through in that 221 and 222 results. So how did we compare against our industry peer group? And in that regard, I'd like to take the last year, the 5th year, which is our last year of trading. And if we look at it on a calendar basis, 222, in terms of net profit terms, net profit margin, actually ONE had the best net profit margins in the industry over those 12 months of calendar trading. So I think that's quite a positive story and development to go from the initial startup to that industry peer position and to position ourselves in the upper quartile in terms of industry profitability. In terms of scale and size, this industry technically uses a term of nominal TEU capacity. So the way they measure size is to look at each particular entity's fleet, how many ships they have, multiply that by the number of TEU standing slots on the ships, and they come up with a league table like this. And as you can see on the table here, we're in 7th position. But if you look, we're pretty close to 5 and 6. It's a very narrow margin. And secondly, there's other ways or other lenses to look at this in terms of scale. You could look at it, number of containers shipped, or you could look at it turnover or revenue, and you get maybe a slightly different result. But fundamentally, we're a medium-sized container shipping company with a global presence. One of the points around the legacy days and getting to day one was, of course, we didn't own any ships outright as ONE. We had to inherit the charter ships or ships that our 3 legacy companies had. And by definition, because those companies had been smaller, they generally had smaller ship sizes, and the slot economics was not so favorable. Plus, at this time, there was also big technological advancements going on in container terminals sizes and in terms of shipbuilding. And we missed that wave a little bit through with our legacy company. So you could say the first couple of years we were a little bit handicapped by our fleet. We had a lot of sort of small to medium-sized ships, not many big ships, and some of those ships were getting towards the end of their economic life. So for the management team, we were very focused on securing a good tonnage pipeline for the future, bigger ships with better slot economics. And so we went out, and over the last 3 years, we've been very active in securing effectively 54 new ships, which will be delivered, of which 20 are already in operation now, and the remaining 30 will be delivered over the course of 224, 225, and 226. And as you can see from this chart here, the great majority of those are 12,000 to 15,000 TEU size, which really are the major future workhorses of both the East-West and the North-South trades. Plus, we've added another 6 24,000s, which couple up with the 6 20s we already had to make a complete loop for the Asia-Europe trade. And the picture actually is of the O&E Innovation. That's our very latest design, 24,400 meter length vessel. She's just been released from the yard, just came through the yard on her launching 6 weeks back, came through Singapore about 3 weeks ago. It is now on her way to Rotterdam, fully loaded down with over 20,000 containers on board, using the very latest innovation and design to make sure that the slot economics, and particularly we'll go on to talk about the carbon efficiency and intensity, is optimal. And then lastly, we have some 7,000s under charter as well coming, which will also be used for our regional trade. So these ships, these 54 ships, getting on for half have been delivered, a mix of long-term leases, and some, and recently the 13,000s actually will be owned and directly on the balance sheet of O&E. It's not just about ships though, it's also about terminals. And as I say, we call it about 250 ports in the world. Like many of our competitors, we use a lot of third-party terminals. We have some of the large global terminal providers like the PSA here, or DPW, or Hutchinson, or APMT, but we rely a lot on many other markets on local terminal providers. And where necessary and where it makes sense strategically, we will actually also invest in some key gateways or in some key hubs. And the first time we did that, really the first significant move, was here in Singapore, soon after the day one, when we invested in the Magenta Singapore terminal, which is a joint venture between the PSA and O&E, where we have 40% equity. It's 4 big berths, 17 key cranes, and that provides a really strong operating base and a high level of automation for O&E's 80 services connecting here, and of course our alliance partnerships who are also calling here in Singapore. Added to that, we also have recently just completing and working through the investment on 3 terminals in the USA on the West Coast. We're just taking the YTI facility in Los Angeles, 51% of the TRAPAC facility also in Los Angeles, and 51% of the Oakland facility there. And those acquisitions are working through at the moment and should be completed by the end of this year. Another investment we made was actually of a company called Atlas, which is actually the 100% owner of Seaspan. And we completed that deal at the end of March. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in more detail and some of the logic behind that later on. But that Atlas or Seaspan is now the largest non-owning operator, so the largest long-term leasing charter company with a fleet of around about 200 vessels by 2024. On the equipment side, of course, not just about ships, not just about terminals, but it's also about equipment. Likewise, we inherited the legacy lease fleet from our 3 parent companies. And a lot of those boxes were working through anyway on their lease, or some of them were quite old. Some of them had less competitive leasing terms. We were able to get economies of scale and get synergies and be able to either long-term lease or actually order own directly containers. So we invested just over 1 million containers of new containers over the last 5 years, a mix of dries, but recently some specials, which give us this ability to handle certain project cargoes. And very importantly, also reefer containers. Reefer is a growing sector of the market, and one that the 3 legacy companies already had a significant presence in. Of course, safety is very, very important to the whole container shipping industry, and particularly to O&E as well. And we continue to have a very active safety campaign program, working through and doing vessel inspections and working on best practice. And that will come even more to the fore as we go forward, as we move more and more away from chartering or leasing assets to actually directly owning and operating. In terms of the environment, in 2021, we set up our green strategy team as ONE with two key focuses. One is managing the current carbon footprint of the existing assets that we have to try to minimize that. And the second is looking at the long-term requirements that we need in terms of the technology and the new fuel types and the new assets we will need to really decarbonize long-term the fleet. So that second part I'm going to cover in a moment, but just in terms of the first part, which is really reducing down our fuel consumption, reducing down our CO2 footprint, a lot of work while we're still operating the fuel and relying on fuel today to power our engines, as all container shipping companies are, is around using the existing assets better and trying to minimize the CO2 footprint. And that's very relevant because we have some regulatory factors coming in. We have the IMO with its carbon intensity indicator, which has already become active in 2023 and will be particularly active in 2024. And then we have the EU's new program under their ETS scheme, or Fit for 55, which kicks in 2024, 2025, where there will be a need to have specific carbon footprints and carbon credit requirements. So reducing down. So for example, the photograph here of one of our vessels with these new bow covers we're fitting to make the vessels more slimline through the air and reduce their profile, saves around about 2%. But you add up all those 2%, it has an important factor. The other areas that we've been doing a lot of trial work is looking also at biofuels. So taking the fuel oil, but also blending it with more sustainable type fuels. And in this regard, the biofuels that we've been using or trialing are really the recycled catering fats, the FAME type product, where we blend that with low sulfur fuel oil and try and reduce down the carbon footprint by using these type of blended fuels. So in terms of strategy, the first phase or the first 5 years we alluded to was very much around the key aspect of setting the company up, getting the economies of scale, getting the synergies, and driving the company forward to make it profitable. And ideally try and get it up into that first quartile in terms of industry profitability, which is what was achieved. Now we talk about the phase two, looking forward, and we continue to want to do all of those things that we've done over the last 5 years, but add an additional dimension, which is to grow the company also in a sustainable way in terms of sustainable growth over the next 5 years. So really a number of key components there. In terms of moving forward, also we continue to be very committed to providing a high quality network, high quality service and shipping services to our customers, to those 28,000. Continuing to look at new ways of enhancing the operational efficiency of the assets that we already have, and designing and delivering and ordering new assets for the future. Continuing to invest in new ship types, new equipment. And last year, when we had our similar media briefing, we outlined this cost averaging long-term vision of working out our investment in a very logical way over the 10-year horizon. So spending around about $20 billion over the 10-year period from 2020 through to 2030. And we're still committed to doing that. And although the markets move up and down, we want to do that in a very logical and sequential way. And we will continue to order tonnage in a very diligent and disciplined way, including other assets over the next 6-7 years. Same way, we will continue to double down on our digitalization, and we'll also look to further enhance the brand, the corporate culture, and developing our talent and our people and our best practice and innovation within the company. And lastly, making sure that we are still financially sound and strong as a company and looking to grow and build the company in a sustainable way, sustainable growth. There's 3 current dynamics or topics I'd just like to briefly touch on as we go through the business assessment and looking at how these may impact us over the next couple of years. The first is around demand growth. And as we know right now, we are going through a slightly weaker demand position in 2023. That's probably around 2 areas. One is that in 2022, we probably had an over ordering as a rebound from the 2021 shortages that many of our customers had. And many customers over-ordered in 2022 and had excess inventory into the first half of 2023. Well, that sales to inventory level is still quite high at the moment. So there is some overhang, and we're going to need to work with and see our customers burn through a lot of those inventory. I think the second one, as we're all aware, is the global economy at the moment. Some people could say technically we're into recession. We certainly know that inflation is high at the moment. We know interests are high. But again, if we look at the actual overall numbers, and even like overnight, the North American numbers for unemployment were surprisingly good. We still are working through that period. We still think that overall container volumes will continue to grow in the future. 6% is what the average has been over the last 25 years. Maybe not quite compound 6%, but we still think there will be growth in terms of trading. And that really links into the second point, which is about trade diversity. When China came into the WTO in 2002, we saw an amazing movement in terms of sourcing and outsourcing and production moving into China with their very, very competitive labor costs, their new tariffs, which are very, very competitive. Well, of course, some of those dynamics have changed, not just economically, but also politically. And as we can see, there are some issues at the moment on tariffs between China and the USA, and to some extent in terms of some of the political tension. And that has led to some de-risking on China as a sourcing location, but also in terms of potentially some political risk as well. So we've seen this swing of movement, not complete, but partial movement away to other areas. So the 1+1, purchasing out of China, but also looking to grow and increase sourcing out of Southeast Asia, the Indian subcontinent, and even some parts of the Mediterranean and out of Africa. And we see that happening. And that means that actually, while the end product may be coming from a different location, actually underneath it, the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers, which are supplying the components to make that finished product, may not necessarily be in those new countries. And therefore, we're seeing at the moment a lot of dynamic developments, particularly in the intra-Asia markets, where a lot of those components still have to come from China or come from Taiwan or other locations to meet the new production in these new locations. So the ton mile and the number of boxes moving is still strong. Added to which, of course, we still have a growing population. And that is particularly true here in Southeast Asia, and of course in Africa as well, and in Latin America. Although, of course, that is less of a factor in Europe, where the population is quite stable, and obviously very much affected also by the energy prices there and the develops in and around Ukraine and Russia. But hopefully that is only a temporary issue and not a long-term issue. The last point or trend is decarbonization. As we are well aware, going back to the Paris Agreement in 2015 to try and cap the world's temperatures by only 1.5 degrees, that remains a major goal of the UN. We have COP28 coming up, COP30 coming up in Dubai very soon, and in November and December, and that'll be a key milestone. But the key milestone for the shipping industry is the IMO, the International Maritime Organization. It is the global regulator. And the IMO is very focused on trying to reduce down the carbon footprint of the shipping industry. Not so straightforward because of a lot of technological issues and the need for green fuel, but is setting new benchmarks. I would like to say that we hope in the next 1 or 2 weeks in London that there will be a breakthrough where we will see stricter and more ambitious targets for the container shipping industry. And certainly our team, ONE and our other container shipping competitors and the World Shipping Council are looking for a more ambitious targets to decarbonize. Financial stability. If you look back over the last 5 years, you'll see quite a variation. You could say realistically that we had a number of black swan events in there, so we would not like to see such wild swings and volatility. Obviously our startup, we don't do that every year. And secondly, obviously the COVID developments, we hope very much we don't see that kind of wild swing in terms of world health issues in the future. However, we do know that shipping and container shipping in particular does have some volatility. And that is down to the waxing and waning in the geopolitics and the global economies. So part of our objective anyway as a liner shipping company, as ONE, is to try to minimize that variation. And of course, moving to better slot economics, greater efficiency, more sustainability will help to stabilize that P&L. But at the same time, when we look at our end-to-end business, we are actually using many other businesses to support us. And some of those businesses are quite significant in terms of their share of wallet with O&E. And secondly, many of those businesses are large, profitable, well-managed, and provide less volatility in terms of their P&L. So we're interested in also potentially having a deeper relationship with those types of businesses and even some investment in those types of businesses. And we refer to those as the wider container shipping value chain. Businesses which are directly related to container shipping or liner shipping and are supporting or active key stakeholders in that supply chain. And we'll come on to talk a little bit about that in a moment. But if we can work on reducing our volatility anyway as Ocean Network Express in terms of our management of our business, but added to which we can get some further stability by gradually building and getting more involvement to the container shipping value chain businesses as well, then overall we can further reduce that volatility in our P&L and earnings over the next 5 to 10 years. So our original strategy for the first 5 years around hardware, software, providing competitive profitability now adds a third dimension, sustainability. And when we say sustainability, we don't just mean in terms of decarbonization. Yes, decarbonization is important, and I alluded to the fact that our strategy team is working on decarbonizing and going to the new green technologies, and we'll come on to that in a little bit in a moment. But also this financial stability, making sure that we are a very efficient, well-managed financial company with a good balance sheet, but also that we're looking at ways to reduce that volatility as well in our financial performance. And then thirdly, making sure that we also have a sustainable organization that can lift and grow the business over the next 5 to 10 years. And we all saw during the COVID times that if you didn't have sufficient resources or people in the right places, you just simply couldn't do certain things to grow as and when the business recovered. So it's very important that we also have an efficient, but also a sustainable and very capable organization in terms of resources. So put those three together, we're now looking at sustainable, competitive profitability as a company. And again, back to this idea of container shipping or O&E improving its profitability, and also thinking about container shipping value chain companies that potentially could come into our portfolio. On the container shipping side, as we said already, our objective is to very much have this strong backbone liner network, high quality service, good schedule reliability, and our landside operations and particularly our customer servicing side to be a very high quality, providing a top tier quality product to the customer. Built around, of course, talent and digitalization, but also around sustainability. And again, continue to invest this $20 billion over this 10-year period to make sure as a shipping line, we continue to be profitable and we have the best assets and best practice and innovation to keep ourselves profitable. But it's then on the other side, with the container shipping value chain, we're looking to also invest in other ancillary businesses. And a good example is the container terminals I talked about recently in terms of acquisition. And we will probably look to bring more container terminals on board in due course, primarily starting with those which are already partially owned by our legacy companies, bring those onto our balance sheet. So key hubs is very important for us, and also gateway hubs. And the logic is three types of logic around that. The first is that we move away for where we have got big movements of business and O&E volume through these particular terminals. We can move the relationship from being less tactical and more strategic, more long-term thinking. Secondly, we can look at the P&L and value proposition to the whole business, not just from the ocean liner side or just from the terminal or depot side, but we can look at it through one lens across the whole operation. And there we can optimize the P&L and the operation by joining the business together and thinking about it more strategically. And thirdly, digitalization and data is becoming more and more critical. As we digitalize the business, we also need to very much integrate the data side as well. So that is a very key point as well. So that then leads us on to Atlas. Atlas, as we said, is one of the leading. It's a very well-managed, significant non-owning operating company with a lot of long-term leases. It provides long-term leases to a multitude of different container shipping companies, including ONE. Today, we have about 20 vessels which are with Seaspan as ONE. That's about 12% of our fleet. Over the next 12 months, that will push up to around about 35 to 40 vessels, which will push us up to around probably about 20 to 25% of our future tonnage provision will be coming through Seaspan. So while we want to keep the operation of the company separate, at the shareholding level, we have more strategic alignment, and we can look longer term to try to have more strategic involvement. We Seaspan in and around the way that we manage our fleet with them, and think about some of the synergies and opportunities to improve the technical side of the business, and particularly around also new builds and decarbonization. So container shipping and the container shipping value chain are the two key areas, and underpinned by 5 key strategic pillars: green strategy, digitalization, talent, finance performance, and global. And I'm just going to touch very briefly on each of these 5 before we close out. So on the green strategy, we talked about the need to decarbonize with the assets we've got. And a lot of work going on there to reduce our carbon footprint. We already set ourselves a target which is quite ambitious. So the IMO requirement for shipping is to reduce your carbon intensity or your ton mile by 40% by 2030 compared with 2008, and to reduce it by 70% by 2050 carbon intensity. And overall to try to reduce your overall carbon usage by 50% by 2050. And at the same time, we have though pushed those boundaries and moved to a more stringent approach. So we actually want to achieve 70% carbon intensity improvement by 2030 compared with 2008, and to actually achieve net zero in terms of carbon emissions by 2050. So not halve it, but go to net zero. And also work on other initiatives like improving environmental conservation, improving ship cycling, and driving and looking at other initiatives. In terms of our goals so far, that requirement by the IMO to get to 40% by 2030, we've already achieved that last year. So we're already now at 50% compared with 2008 in terms of our carbon intensity, and well on the way to beating our 70% carbon intensity objective by 2030. A lot of measures we've taken with the existing fleet and technology, new systems around digitalization and improving, using AI, etc., to improve the efficiency of the existing assets. But also I'd like to just touch on 2 or 3 current initiatives we're taking. So the last 20 vessels that we announced in terms of new builds are 13,000s, which we will actually own and bring onto our balance sheet directly as ONE. These are the new flex designs. So they will come out of the yards in 224, 225 with fuel oil, but very soon after that, we have the ability to retrofit them back to either work with ammonia or to work with methanol. When we ordered those ships 12 months back, we knew that there was not enough certainty in terms of methanol, and there wasn't enough certainty in and around the technological safety factors around ammonia or availability. But we think over the next 12 to 24 months, we will see a major breakthrough, hopefully in terms of methanol production and focus, and hopefully in terms of the option to think about ammonia as well. So we haven't made a decision yet which technology we're going to go to. Very much the jury's out. And like the rest of the industry, we're very interested in methanol at the moment, but there are other solutions coming down the pipe. The second one is to work with those 28,000 customers we have, to work with them in terms of decarbonizing our supply chain and their supply chain. So how they move their freight, they can move it on fast transit services or slower transit services. And we've developed this new eco calculator, which provides them with, on any inland point, port to port option that we offer around the world, they can look up and see, which is the lowest cost, which has got the fastest transit, but also which has the lowest carbon footprint. So working together in the supply chain, we're looking to decarbonize and move forward, and working with our customers and helping them to decarbonize as well in their thinking. And in terms of the new fuels in our fleet, we intend by the end of this decade, 2030, to already have ships deployed and operating with the new green fuels. And then we will scale that up over the next 20 years, based on the fact that we can't, as an industry, all build new ships all at the same time. About 3 to 4% of the total global fleet can only be replaced at any one time through the availability of shipbuilding practices. But we hope very much by then that all the new assets that we build in the future will be using the green fuels, so that by 2050, we can get to this net zero target. And then in terms of digitalization, very important. And when we started the company, really started up with a completely new digital platform, new systems, and we've been very focused on that since. So channel digitalization is about how we connect with our 28,000 customers. We've moved from a very kind of manual, very analog way of working as an industry now to really being online, using online systems, e-commerce, apps, mobile phones, API. In terms of operational digitalization, the internal workings of our company, both on the marine side and the land side, and our back-end systems work at a very, very high level of digital maturity, which we're continuing to upgrade and enhance all the time. And we have recently released OneForce, which is our new digital platform internally for our sales and customer service team. So we're completely linked for all of our 28,000 customers around the world. And we have that dashboard visibility, and we can service them very quickly in and around particular issues or developing their cargo pipelines. And then on the digital enabled service side, we recently announced the use of, for our reefer fleet, moving to these new telematic or IoT devices, which we can fit into the containers, and which longer term we'll be able to track and be able to use this platform. So that's very key. Working also with the new technologies like AI and machine learning, working with other ecosystems or industry platforms, digitalizing the whole industry and looking at DCSA, for example, which is the Digital Container Shipping Association, which we're a member of, standardizing EDI messages and applications, working with some of the new blockchain arrangements, and continuing to work with our partners in the future to really fully digitalize our company and move us forward. On the HR side, talent, very, very important. So it's all around attracting talent, developing talent, and retaining talent. And we all learnt about that over the last 3-4 years, particularly during the COVID times, and the fact that levels of employment now are much more competitive now. I think we've positioned ourselves as a new company. We really want to make ONE a great place to work, make it an attractive company to work at, and therefore we continue to look at these various initiatives. And the latest being our One Academy, which we launched over the last year, which is a kind of virtual online academy for all of our Magentians globally, connecting us together, improving communications, improving knowledge and understanding about the different teams and processes we have in the company, how we can work together, moving staff in and around the different teams so they have more insight to how the company works, developing a learning and development courses online so people improve their product knowledge and working with the company, and also thinking about people's mobility and people's career management as well. So very important. On the finance side, very important that we maintain our financial discipline as a company. This is very important to us as the management of ONE, and also to our shareholders and to all of our stakeholders. We've got ourselves into a profitable situation. We've built up a good balance sheet. We've got good reserves. We'll continue to pay good dividends to our shareholders. But at the same time, we need to think also about how we use our funds and do that in a sustainable way with sustainable financing approach, as we explained. Return on equity on average of 10% is still very, very critical to us. And that $20 billion pipeline of investments, by doing that in a gradual and steady way and thinking about whether we use our own cash reserves or whether we use some leverage through our special relationships and our financing and leasing, we'll look at those on a case-by-case basis. But we are not going to take risks. We're going to be diligent and prudent. And obviously, we're very aware that the next 12 months is going to be a bit challenging in terms of getting through the current cycle, but there will be good times ahead. And lastly, I'd just like to close out on global strategy. So very much thinking about being a global company, about thinking about growing the business. We inherited many trade lanes, which we were strong in when we put them together as a company, but also thinking wider than that, thinking about other geographies, thinking about which trade lanes are growing faster, which types of commodities and segments are growing quicker, making sure that we're positioning our assets and our thinking 3, 4, 5 years ahead to join and make sure we're covered for our existing client base to grow into those particular new markets, and making sure we've got the assets, the terminals, the equipment, the systems to be able to work through that. And then, of course, also having good diligence and very professional compliance in and around to support that.
It just now leaves me to thank Jeremy for joining us today. I'm sure you'd like to give him a round of applause, and also to our online audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.